This week on the WriterCon podcast.
Quota.
Did you say
quota?
Quota?
Quota.
Meaning page count?
I think making yourself write a certain number of words per week.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Rene Gutteridge, best-selling author of over 30 novels and screenplays.
Thank you, Jesse Ulrich, and hello, writers. We're recording this episode a little bit in advance. I'll warn you up front because I've got travel plans. So if some major story has happened in the last couple of days and we don't talk about it, that's why. We'll get there next time, I promise. Rene, it's December now. Have you started getting ready for Christmas yet?
It would be crazy if I didn't. So I'm going to say yes. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to do at Christmas. Decorating and baking and shopping. You do all that? You bake? No, I don't. Oh. Thanks for calling me out on that.
I was Bill, just so impressed. I'm sorry.
Well, listen, I try. And so.
Then you bake.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Jesse, how about you? Same question, except Hanukkah, right?
Yep. There's not really a lot of preparation that needs to be done for Hanukkah, especially if you don't have kids and you're my age. So it's really just, do you ask for a gift from your adult parent as an adult? Which I do usually do. My dad usually wants to give me something. But yeah, now that I own a house and I can actually put lights up that I could leave there permanently, I might. My wife, who is not Jewish, has convinced me of this. Since Hanukkah is technically the festival of lights, I shouldn't be fighting against putting up house lights, just more in the colors of Hanukkah, which are more blue and white versus green and red. So I might do that.
I did not know that. Blue and white.
I did not know that either.
Really, it was really just sort of white before, but the state of Israel also adopted blue and white as their colors. So it's just like any holiday that needs a color scheme, you just sort of steal that one. But... if you ever look at Hanukkah decorations or Hanukkah cards or whatever, or the candles, they're always usually blue and white. And I don't know who decided that, but we all tacitly agreed to it. So I might put up some blue and white lights and, maybe write out Happy Hanukkah on my roof. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see how much time I have.
Well, we are going to need an update on this.
All right. Let you know.
Next time. Well, today our guest is James Scott Bell, who is, of course, a former WriterCon headliner and one of my favorite writers of both crime and genuinely helpful books about the craft of writing. His latest release is Romeo's Rage, which is the 7th book in his Mike Romeo thriller series. And we're going to talk to him about all of that and more. But first, the news. Okay, one quick story before we get into the two meatier ones. I just wanted to update everyone because we mentioned before Spotify's plans to get into the audiobook market, and they've launched that, but unfortunately are having some snags. First of all, and they're not the first person to have snags with Amazon when they're trying to sell apps. The first problem was, of course, if they sell audiobooks, as they plan to do, not to include it in your Spotify subscription, but as an add-on charge. But if they do that within the Apple sold app, then Apple wants a cut. So then they wanted to change to, we'll sell them from our website and just tell people on the app, go to our website. Well, Apple wouldn't even permit that. They would not allow Spotify to even explain to users where they can buy an audiobook or list it or anything like that. So negotiations are ongoing, but you heard it from me first. If there's an audiobook you want to listen to on Spotify, go to their website. Okay, news story number 2, which has to do with BDMI investing in Book.io, which I'm sure you probably already know. No, I didn't. The first ever NFT ebook platform. Book.io is creating this platform for digital ownership in book publishing by putting ebooks themselves and audiobooks on the blockchain through this proprietary technology that they have. So readers can own their digital books and sell them if they choose to, creating a secondary market. But here's a nice pro-author twist. It's a secondary market where publishers and authors can still earn money on not only the first resale, but every resale going on into perpetuity. Okay, Jesse, I'm all in favor of authors having additional income streams. I'm tempted to investigate, except the problem is I don't really understand anything about this. Could you please explain NFTs and what all this is and why we might want to do it?
All right, so NFTs stand for non-fungible tokens, and in essence, they're really like, you remember, have you ever tried to like open up a PDF that's been like locked down due to whatever reason? Password protected or encrypted in some way. That's sort of what NFTs are. They are designed to be owned by one person, and sort of like a piece of art that you would hang up in your house, right? Except it is digital.
Except you can't.
Yeah, except you can't do the things you would want to do with something that you would like want at an auction. And while this is a great idea, they're a little late to the game because all NFT prices and all NFT marketplaces have all crashed since, sort of with the collapse of cryptocurrency over the last couple months. And so I don't know if this is worthwhile. If it's really just using NFTs to allow customers to buy a copy of a book that they can then resell and the author will continue to get money, that's great. If it's just another way of encrypting ebooks to a certain platform, that could bring authors more money, but be more complicated for the consumer. So I'm also curious to investigate this. It really depends on how they're using it. If it's just the selling of NFTs of books and audiobooks, I don't think it's going to be that successful, because what are you going to listen to it on and what are you going to read it on?
But I mean, they're selling ebooks, but obviously other people are going to have the ebook, so it's not an exclusive ownership. It's not even really a limited, unless it's some kind of special.
Are they digitally signing
edition.
it? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, is it a special edition? Like, it would have to be something very unique, and those are two non-unique forms of media, I would say. Like, an audiobook is an audiobook unless they're doing something extra, like maybe you're getting the outtakes, which I think would be hilarious as someone who edits audiobooks. The outtakes are my favorite parts. Like, it's going to have to be a limited series of something. It can't be like a special individual one for each NFT. That's too exhausting for the authors to produce, I would think.
This week, DC Comics, I think it's well established on this podcast that I'm a comics nerd, and they started releasing all these comic book NFTs, which are basically the same thing. You can get older comics that you probably would never buy with actual real money, although the NFTs weren't cheap, and there were like 6 different tiers of the same Superman #1 you could buy. And I mean, to me, though, you buy something like that to hold it in your hands and read it. I don't understand the function, and yet I could see on the website that people were buying these things right and left.
I mean, I feel like all these NFT things are going to have to come up with a way to allow you to show it to other people, because that's really one of the main reasons people buy auctioned items, is so they can brag about them to other people. So if it's just hidden and only you can see it, that removes, I think, one of the #1 selling point of these sort of things.
All right. Well, we'll continue to report on this story, and by the time I understand it, it'll probably be too late to get into it, but we'll try and keep you listeners informed. News story number 3. Man is released from prison after 23 years due to a podcast. Baltimore prosecutors dropped the charges against, you guys correct me on the pronunciation, Adnan Syed, who was released last month after he spent 23 years in prison on a murder connection. This was the subject of the podcast Serial, right?
The first season,
right. And the state's attorney has now instructed her office to dismiss charges. He's been cleared by DNA testing. Rene, you were the one who brought this story to my attention, didn't you? What's the takeaway here?
Well, I think a couple. First of all, Serial was what got me into podcasts, and my life's never been the same. I think Serial got a lot of people into podcast, and true crime investigative podcasting. It was excellent. If you haven't listened to it, I would suggest listening to it, even if you're a fiction writer. They did an amazing job of how they rolled out the story. I mean, just pay attention. It's a true story, but how they rolled it out, how what was her name? Koenig?
Sarah Koenig.
Sarah Koenig did all that. It's really a nice piece of just storytelling in general, true storytelling. But the other thing I wanted to point out is, like, my gosh, the power of story, you guys.
Yes.
Like, wow, like changed a man's life, probably is going to have a significant impact on these kinds of cases in general. I mean, to see that a guy's life was changed like this over this situation where he was falsely accused. And man, I mean, I just want to encourage people, like, don't ever discount the power of telling a story. You know, when they first took this on, this was an unknown story. People didn't know who this was. What they did is they took an unknown story, developed a character in a sense. He's of course a real person, but they developed this plot line and this character and the story and put it in a way that people would consume. And now they have this huge impact. So anyway, that was my takeaway from it.
Yeah. And as a lawyer, of course, what I'm hearing is if you're wrongfully committed, wrongfully accused, let's say, of a crime, forget the lawyers, get somebody to do a podcast or write a book.
It's not that far from the truth, right? Like, I mean, this is not the only podcast or documentary series that has exposed some of this stuff, right? So I mean, John Grisham was one of them too, I think, right?
Sure.
So so like, I think, you know, this is more than just like, oh, that's cool. If you're a writer, it should have an impact on you and understanding. Even if you're writing fiction, by the way, you can write about some of this stuff in fiction and still bring exposure to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also led to my favorite recent TV show, which is Only Murders in the Building. Which
really?
Yeah,
I love that show.
Yeah, the Tina Fey character is supposed to be like a quasi evil version of Sarah Koenig, pretty much.
Right.
And and like as someone who's in the podcast business, like the amount of PR that podcasts in general got from Serial and the outgrowth of true crime podcasts, like, it makes my job easier trying to sell podcasts to companies. I'm like, remember Serial, right? And so it's, at least people have heard about that. I wish one of my clients wanted to do a true crime podcast, because then I could actually, make money from this. But we'll get there eventually.
Maybe we could add a segment. No, never mind. All right, Jesse, take us to the interview.
All right. Well, James Scott Bell is the winner of the International Thriller Writers Award and the author of the #1 bestseller for writers, Plot and Structure, which I talk about all the time. Love it. He served as fiction columnist for Writer's Digest magazine and has written many best-selling craft books, including Conflict and Suspense, How to Write Dazzling Dialogue, and Write Your Novel from the Middle, which he actually taught at WriterCon, I believe. So that was fun. He attended the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he studied writing with Raymond Carver and graduated with honors from the University of Southern California Law School. And a former trial lawyer, Jim lives and writes in Los Angeles. His website is jamesscottbell.com. His latest release is Romeo's Rage #7 in the Mike Romeo Thriller series. Jim, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Nice to see you both.
Hey, Jim. We have a traditional first question, and you've been on the podcast before, so you've probably heard, but who knows? Your mind might have changed since then. So I'm just going to go with it. If you could give writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
Quota.
Did you say quota?
Quota.
Meaning page count?
I mean, I think making yourself write a certain number of words per week. I used to do a daily quota, and I set it rather high, and I'd get really upset if I didn't meet it, and there'd be pressure. So what I've done over time is what I advise writers to do is find out how much you can comfortably write in a week. And then add 10% to that, make that a weekly goal. So I try to write 6 days a week, take a full day off to recharge. So if I miss a day or something intrudes, I can make it up on other days. And to me, that's so important because you look back after several years and you look and say, how did all those books get here? And it's because you did that. You showed up, you did your writing stint. So important. And you learn when you make yourself go and do the writing, you are learning too. So that's always really the number one piece of advice I give to writers.
And it's a great piece of advice. So you grew up in and around Hollywood, and I think you're still there. And so how has that shaped what you write, your writing style, or anything else? What do you think?
Well, yeah, growing up in Los Angeles, which has, of course, a storied history, quote unquote, and Hollywood, where my dad grew up. It's the best, to me, the best noir suspense crime city in the world in terms of setting. There's so many settings, so many nuances, so many neighborhoods, and so on. And I've always loved the history of the place. So it inspires me. So most of my books are set here. And I continue to love it. I love, there's challenges, we all know, to cities and so on. But, we're close to the ocean. My wife and I like to 20 minutes away and go sit on the beach and find food and all of those things as well. So, yeah, it's part of me, and hopefully I'm part of it.
Well, so I stumbled upon a book of yours that I didn't realize you'd written, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And I got to read the title because it's kind of long for an old brain like mine. Some People Are Dead, part essay, part memoir, parts unknown. And this is a book in which you ponder the question of life and death, and how we all know we'll die, but sometimes we think we're going to be the exception. It is so true. So I've got to know what prompted you to write this book.
This is one of my favorite books, by the way. I like writing quirky nonfiction. Now, my writing books are serious, but I love doing essays and kind of exploring different areas, kind of like Ray Bradbury used to do on the side. Well, one of my favorite writers growing up was William Saroyan. He's kind of not known as much today as he was back in the 30s and 40s. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner, wrote wonderful short stories. And he was just a guy who loved writing. Writing was his life. So later in his later years, he would just put out these collections of essays. And he put out this book that was so quirky. It's called Obituaries. And all he did was he took the Hollywood, the Variety, the list of celebrities who had died that year, and he just went through the names, whether he knew them or not. He just started writing, what does this name mean? And what bunny trail do I follow? It was just so amazing. So I decided to do that. I went through obituaries for a year. Just some people I knew, some people I didn't, and I would write little mini essays about them, however they came out. And people seem to really respond to it because, you can read these in short bits and so on, but it's kind of an insight into, my thinking on so many things. And I just enjoyed doing it. And it's so amazing because that's the kind of book that would never be published traditionally anymore, unless you were a celebrity of some sort. But I was able to do it. So happy it's there.
Well, in addition to that, you have also written, among other things, legal thrillers, a genre you and I are both very fond of. But unlike me, you have written zombie legal thrillers. You want to talk to us a little bit about Mallory Kane and all that? What's going on there?
Well, back when the zombie craze, Pride and Prejudice and zombies, and that stuff was happening, I thought to myself, how can I do some kind of genre mashup on this? And it occurred to me that the zombies were always the monsters. I thought, why don't I make the zombie a hero? And further, all right, I write legal thrillers. Let's make the zombie a lawyer. And because, out here in LA, the people really can't tell the difference between zombies and lawyers. So I thought that's perfect. And I sat down with my agent one evening at a conference, and we just kind of hashed this back and forth that this lawyer would be someone who represents the supernatural characters floating around LA, like vampires and werewolves. And like in one of the books, there's a werewolf trying to get custody of his kids. We thought about Frankenstein's monster being denied health of a pre-existing condition, those sorts of things.
No doubt.
And it turned into a 3-book series. I did it under a pseudonym. It was published by Kensington. The first one was called Pay Me in Flesh. But then I got the rights back and I published them under my own name now. So a lot of fun. I really enjoyed those.
Sweet.
That's fun. Yeah, that's super quirky. And I hope that inspires our listeners to, think outside the box in some of this, because there's a lot of boxes you can easily fit into. When you think outside the box, you stand out. Okay, so you've also, in the past, you've written historical legal dramas. And that's about the time I think you and I met, was when you were writing those. And I would like to hear about well, first of all, I would imagine you love research if you're going to do historical. Tell us about how you did the research, even how you organized research for something like that, if you did. And I just also want to mention, before you answer that question, how much I love how many female protagonists you have through the years in your books. So anyway, go ahead. I just had to insert that.
I'll take that. Yeah, when I was doing legal thrillers. This is back around 2000, and I wondered about how to do a legal thriller in another kind of genre, and I thought about historical legal thriller. And one of the eras that is really not covered in much historical fiction that I could find is turn of the century Los Angeles. From 1800s to the 1900s, when the city was moving from kind of this Wild West vibe to an actual urban environment. And the courtrooms were really like the Wild West, because, there was all kinds of, courtroom things you could do that you can't do now. And there were some legendary lawyers like Earl Rogers who practiced. And so, and I thought, what about a woman wanting to practice law in those days? And of course, that was extremely rare. Really, probably just maybe half a dozen you could name in the early part of the 1900s. So I thought, what a great setting and what a great era to have a young woman wanting to practice law in Los Angeles at that time. And again, I love the history of the city. There's so much there. So I spent a lot of time at the downtown library going through microfilm of, the old Times and Examiner and so forth. And excuse me, I have 2 huge binders right here of the material I came up with, copies and so forth. So extensive research. And, it was so interesting because as the more deeply I got into it, and then I would walk downtown the same streets that my hero would have walked, is that I got so into it that I started to almost have daydreams. Like I was walking, she was right in front of me and I'm walking, following her. It was really kind of weird, but wonderful. The smells and everything. Anyway, it was just a way for me to dive into that and eventually produced 6 books in the Kit Shannon series.
And before we leave this discussion of your multifaceted, multi-genre, something like multifarious, I don't know, your work.
Nefarious, yes.
Tell us about the Mike Romeo series. Your most recent book is Romeo's Rage, right?
Yes, it is. I wanted to do a classic lone wolf character, not necessarily a PI, but I love Raymond Chandler and Mickey Spillane and Travis McGee, all those kinds of that kind of genre. And again, I figured LA is such a great place for this to occur. And so I conceived of a character, gave him a backstory, which is kind of unique, is that he is a child genius. He was admitted to Yale at the age of 14, and he's just incredibly classically trained. But there's something that happened to him that changed the trajectory of his life, which I won't tip off, but
right.
that makes him into this character who's now living in Los Angeles, kind of off the grid with his best friend, who is a rabbi lawyer, who is a former Mossad agent, who is kind of his benefactor, and they work together. And from there, the plots go on. There's plenty of action, and they're action plots, but they're written in first person, which I love, and try to give him a unique voice. And so they're going great guns, and I'm going to keep doing them.
Okay, something else I want to hear about. Speaking of how innovative you are, you've even got an interactive app, right? What's that about?
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of things. I've got a course out from what used to be called the Great Courses, now called Wondrium. It's a full-on writing course. Then I've also got a course of videos available on my website. And then there's an interactive app which is called Knockout Fiction, and it's found at the site called Hiveword, HIVEWORD, hiveword.com. And it's a one-time purchase. And what it is it walks you through from just a germ of an idea all the way through to a finished novel, giving you interaction, giving you exercises to do so that you can follow it and create your novel with characters and scenes and all of that. And kind of using the templates that have helped me, that I've developed. So a lot of writers that I've heard from really like it. It's just, it's a way to do your novel, let it interact with you with it. It's like having a writing coach with you. Yeah. So thanks for asking.
Great idea.
That's really cool. So you're one of the most prolific writers I know. And I think everybody would love to hear what your writing day looks like. When does it start? When does it end? How do you know which thing to work on, where, when? How do you organize yourself in 8 hours and go to the beach?
Well, I get up really early when it's still dark. I love that. Get the coffee going and, kind of get the day rolling. My wife joins me. We have a little quiet time together. And I try to make writing like the first thing I do, the first big thing I do during the day. I try to get started on my quota. Because if I know that if I get a good start, no matter kind of what happens the rest of the day, I'm that much ahead. And again, I try to write, my 1,000 words. This is kind of my daily quota. And I generally start by rereading my previous day's work, kind of very slightly. Don't make major edits, but I will edit a bit of it. And that gets me back into the flow of the story. And so then I write and I do that. And once I finish my quota, if I'm going good, I'll keep going for a while. But then I have other projects. I like to have multiple projects going so that I can kind of switch my brain over. So I might go over and work on a new nonfiction. I might go over here and work on some short stories, whatever kind of. I've got my project board lined up, knowing what I'm doing. And then I always have at least my next novel. I always have that in development, kind of like a movie studio. Rene, you would know all about that. In development. And
can last there forever.
I know. Fortunately, it's not development hell because I'm in charge. So I always, I'll be doing notes. I'll be doing maybe a little scene here and there, character sketches and so forth. So that's really, I want to keep that hamster wheel going. And so generally I do that. That's my morning. Early afternoon is zombie time. I mean, my creative juices aren't flowing. And then I'll probably do some business things then, maybe some marketing things. Then a little bit in the late afternoon, and then I'm done.
You have been very successful in both the traditional and the independent publishing worlds. Can you talk about that? What are your opinions on both?
Well, I was very content and happy in traditional publishing. I worked with some great houses, some great editors, and of course got my start and built up from there. When the independent publishing, what do you call it, revolution, disruption, was really taking off,
yes.
Around 2010, 2011, when, people were really reporting great things. I kind of stuck my toe in and was kind of surprised at how much the water covered my toe. I mean, it was pretty amazing thing that you could do this. Mm-hmm. And when it came time to decide on going with another contract, I just finished one, or trying to be independent for a while, I decided to go independent and see what would happen. And as a result of that, I got a lot of my rights back to previous books, which is a tremendous thing to have. But then I started producing the new stuff, and I've been quite happy here, just in terms, monetarily, also creatively, also the speed with which you can publish something. You finish a book, you don't have to wait a year and a half before it appears. Mm-hmm. So I have nothing bad to say about traditional publishing. It has its own challenges for writers, and in this changing marketplace and shrinking bookstores and so forth, there are challenges there too. But I'm amazed, really. I mean, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, to think that writers could actually do this. I mean, there was self-publishing, but you had to pay. Yeah, you had to pay a lot of money for books that would sit in your garage.
Right.
But now it's a real thing, and it's like, it's kind of, I'm still amazed by it. And it's just, but you've got to approach it like a business. One of the things I think that I did right was immediately, because I've run businesses before, was to sit down, come up with a business plan, and not just start, throwing things out there. To make a go of it, you've got to think of it in business terms. There are ways to do it. I wrote a book called How to Make a Living as a Writer. And in that book, I give kind of a simple business plan for doing this. But you've got to have that approach, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's very smart. And that's hard for a lot of writers, business and plan, and the creative brain. Sometimes we have to really work at it. So it's nice that you have that in your book where we could just copy yours and just go for it. But that's, I do have it.
It's not a lot of writers, like you said, Rene, get goosebumpily when they hear about, business things and kind of that, left brain thinking. But the principles are not that hard to understand. and implement. So if you just give yourself some time, I think you can make a go of it. So anyway.
Well, I think that, that the bigger word there besides business is plan. And you have to plan as a writer, or you're just going to be all over the place. So it's a good muscle to start learning now, especially for the heavily right-brained folks like myself. But you just can't be willy-nilly, no matter if you're in traditional publishing or independent. Neither one of those work with just the right side of your brain, just tilts it over all the time. You got to be able to think through plans. So, and I have a follow-up question real quick on that. You started in traditional, went over to independent. Do you think that plan, that course of action, starting in traditional, getting a reader base, et cetera, helped the success in independent publishing? Or do you think now with independent publishing being so huge and all that it offers, somebody could just go straight in to independent publishing and do as well without the traditional publishing start?
That's a really good question. In my case, I had the years of building up a reader base that helped me tremendously when I started with indie, because I had, an email list, I had a fan list, all of that, and I had backlist books to put up. These days, in traditional publishing, they're not really nurturing new writers like they used to. I mean, you've got to be able to come out of the box pretty big to continue to publish with a big publisher. There are smaller publishers. That might be so. I haven't really explored that with people, but there are a lot of boutique publishers out there now that can help new writers, and it might be a way to get started that way. I think the model now is that when a traditional publisher is going to take on a new writer, I mean a big publisher, they want to know that that's going to be a big hit. They want it to be. Now, they don't always know how to make that happen. I mean, it's the business is quite notorious for not knowing how to guarantee a hit. But if a really good writer gets a contract and the book doesn't sell real well, they're liable to be not given the backing and the nurture and the time that they would otherwise need. And then they've given the rights to that book to the publisher and usually can't publish it themselves for many years. So I think if a young writer is studious about it and puts their writing through a grinder, in other words, you've got to produce a piece of writing that you've been tough with yourself, that you've gotten editing, that you've gotten feedback, that you've really worked as if you were going to submit it to a big publisher. If you've done that, then I think, and you're able to keep doing it, I think you have a chance to get a foothold in independent publishing.
That's good. That's good advice. Well, I remember a character that you created years ago, a basketball playing nun.
Gee, where did I get that idea?
I don't know. It's a great story if you want to tell it. But my question to you is, give us some tips. Give our listeners some tips on creating interesting characters. You're known for that, and not all thriller and suspense books have interesting characters. Sometimes they're so plot heavy you forget there's a character involved. What are your tips for being able to do both, creating really interesting characters, whatever genre you're in, along with everything else that has to go in?
That's a big question. Creating characters is very important. I always start with I need to get the feeling of the character. I don't sit down with a list of questions, to fill out hair color, this, that, and the other. What I want is a visual to do something to me. And I also want to hear the voice of the character. Because if they are speaking, when they start speaking in a in dialogue that doesn't sound like me, then I'm starting to hear another character. So I usually start off by figuring out, kind of the general outline of a character that I want, age and so forth. And then I try to find a picture that pops out at me. I used to cut pictures out of magazines, People Magazine and so forth, and have this box of pictures to try to get something that gave me a picture of the character. But you can go on the internet now and find any kind of profile you want. And so I usually look at a bunch of faces until I see one that goes, wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. And it makes me think this might be a real character. And then I do a voice journal where it's a free form document where I'm just typing as if the character is talking to me, and I might prompt him with questions. And I keep going until suddenly he starts to talk like a real character, not me forcing anything. So it starts to have the character come alive. And then you try to add, I think, a few details that are unique. I especially love doing this with minor characters. Minor or secondary characters are often throwaways by writers, or they're cliches, and they walk on stage and they do a cliche thing and then they're gone. These are opportunities to really spice up a scene. And so I will spend a lot of time trying to come up with characters that are kind of quirky, that are kind of surprising in how they look and in how they speak. And if you just give that some time, you'll begin to develop a muscle that does that for you. So that's, that it's not a real secret. It's just a matter of learning to work with your imagination on coming up with ideas for characters.
Sounds exactly right. So what are you working on now? What can readers expect from you next?
Well, I am, of course, working on my next Romeo, and I'll always be working on the next Romeo. I've also got a new writing book that I'm working on that I'm kind of excited about. And part of it's going to include a look into James Scott Bell's secret notebook. When I started trying to learn how to write, and this was back in 1988, I studied like crazy. I read books. I took copious notes on what was working for me, what I learned, what my process was, and then I'd revise it. And I had this big notebook of my notes throughout those years. So I thought, they were helpful to me. And I went back and looked at them again. I thought, oh, that's a really good tip. So I'm going to publish a bunch of those, as well as some other things that have helped me along the way. So I love doing and teaching writing, because the craft is just so amazingly fun and rewarding. And I love helping writers get better. And so that'll be another track that I'll always be on.
That's fantastic. Hey, Jim, it's always great to see you. Thanks for coming back to the podcast.
Wow. Well, it was great to see you. And man, how's Oklahoma?
Cold.
Still there?
Yes, it's still there.
We're expecting a snowstorm on Monday.
Okay. Wow. It's freezing in LA. It was like 68 this morning.
Oh my. That's why you're wearing a sweater, right?
T-shirt. Anyway. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Jim. Thanks for coming.
Right. And it's not too late to join the WriterCon Facebook group either. Do it today and join us. Learn what happens in between the podcasts on Facebook. All right. Until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. We'll see you next time.